No matter what we do in life, our lives are filled with stories. And these stories are essential for many reasons. They help us connect with others. They preserve our culture. They're great for education and learning. They give us a sense of identity and self-understanding. They entertain. They give us moral and ethical guidance. They help us with problem solving and creativity, and also with emotional expression and healing. In essence, stories enrich our lives by helping us connect, learn, grow, and find meaning in our own experiences. Today, I am thrilled to introduce a remarkable individual who has dedicated her career to unlocking the transformative power of storytelling. As the CEO of Talk Boutique and the Thought Leader Academy, Andrea Sampson is a visionary leader who understands that stories are more than just words. They are the lifeblood of human connection, the catalyst for change, and the blueprints for a better future. Andrea's journey is a testament to the tremendous power of a story. With a background in marketing, communications, and executive coaching, she has helped countless individuals and organizations discover their unique voices and craft narratives that resonate deeply with audiences. Under her leadership, Talk Boutique has become a beacon for those seeking to harness the magic of storytelling, empowering speakers, thought leaders, and change makers to share their messages with the world. In a world where information is abundant, but true connection is rare, Andrea reminds us that stories are our greatest tool. They bridge divides, inspire action, and transform lives. Through her work, Andrea demonstrates that the right story, told in the right way, has the power to change everything.
You're going to help us kind of see a lot of things. You're going to take the direct route there. How are you going to tell that story? In what detail? And what are the pieces along the way that you're going to kind of like the breadcrumbs you're going to leave for us that we may not even know you're leaving until you get to that point. And suddenly then you go, oh my God, I get it. I get it. Right. And we love those stories, right? We love it where a storyteller suddenly switches mid-story to something that actually feels unrelated until you hear it. And then you go, oh my God, I didn't even see that coming. And look what they did. And that's a good storyteller. And that's a good idea-centric storyteller.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in The Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fire Forged Leader podcast. Today we have Andrea Sampson, who is the founder and CEO of both Talk Boutique as well as the Thought Leader Academy. So welcome onto the show today, Andrea. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Steve. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you today.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before, and I want to get into a lot of different details, around storytelling, around leadership, things like that. But to start off with, We just had Drew Dudley on the podcast, and I find that absolutely amazing that you actually know Drew, and just by
Yes.
happenstance we got together. But
Yeah, it's such a great, it just makes me smile when you say his name. I love Drew. He is such a, an amazing human, an incredible leader, and inspiring. He's somebody who I have learned so much from. And yeah, I was so excited to see that you had had that conversation with Drew. And yeah, just amazing, synchronicities in our world, right?
agreed. And I don't think anything happens just by happenstance. This was meant to be for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, just with that connection, uh, I already know, but just for the listeners a little bit, how did you and Drew actually come to be in the same space at the same time?
Yeah, so I started. So my background, I worked for most of my career in advertising, and I got to a certain point. I think I had spent almost 25 years, and woke up and realized that I like to say, an idealist in a capitalist world, and I needed to make some changes, and so I didn't know what I was going to do, and I continued to work in advertising, but I started to do some volunteer work, and one of the things that happened was I had the very good fortune to be hired by TEDx Toronto. And, all TEDx's are volunteer run, and I was hired as a speaker's coach. And one of the tools as I was being trained as a speaker's coach for TEDx Toronto, was we were given this video that was done by this guy named Drew Dudley, who I didn't know at the time. And the video was based on Drew's experience of being a speaker at TEDx Toronto and giving his sort of best practices for new speakers coming on board. And so, of course, I went and watched his TED Talk and, really loved his TED Talk. I mean, and I think I was telling you earlier, we still use it as a bit of a teaching tool. His lollipop moment. There's just such an amazing, amazing message in that TED Talk that we use in terms of being able to put an idea inside of a story. And he does it so beautifully. But I mean, I loved his TED Talk, and I probably had been working with TEDx Toronto for about 3 years. I think it was my third TEDx, when I kind of, we were looking for an MC, and I was the head of curation that year, and m- said, well, Drew, who I had gotten to know a little bit because he would always come and I'd had good conversations with him. And I recommended that he be our MC. And so he and I worked pretty closely together that year, and we did it again the next year as well. And so I got to know him really well, and just so appreciated everything that he brings to the table in terms of, leadership and inspiration, and also just his presence. I mean, such an incredible presence. And I mean, all that, and an incredible storyteller, probably one of the best storytellers that I've ever met. And I've met a lot of storytellers, let me tell you.
Oh, I'm guessing in that many years with Ted. So, the research that I've done on you, Andrea, the TED Speakers Coach was really a turning point in you finding your true passion, right? So, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it absolutely was. I mean, like I said, I had that moment in advertising, and I knew that I wanted to do something that would create impact in the world. It was the year just think about it. I was at a point in my life where I was coming up on my 50th birthday. And, you have these moments in life where you think, what is it that I want to leave behind? What is it, the legacy of who I am? And I realized that all the things, when you're 20 and you're thinking about, the life ahead of you, and you have these goals, right? Like, what do you want to do? You want to, have a good career. You want to have a family. You want to, buy the house, have the husband, do all the stuff, like whatever it is, at 20, because at 20 you're naive, and and society tells you a lot of what you should want. And as I'm at 50 looking backwards, and I realized I'd done it all. I'd reached all of those goals.
Mm.
And where from here? And that was the point at which I decided this part of my life, I'm 50, I'm turning 50, and um, if I'm lucky, I've got another 30, 40 years on the planet. Um, what am I going to do with those 30, 40 years? And because not all of them are going to be good, let's face it, it does get harder as you get older. So what do I want to leave behind? How do I want to make a dent in this planet, this universe? What do I want to leave behind? And so I started really soul searching. And that was around the time that I had this like moment of being volunteered by TEDx Toronto. And at the time, I didn't actually know a lot. I mean, I knew about the TED world, of course, but this was 2012, 2013, and it was in the early days of the TEDx world. And I didn't realize how much of an impact it was going to make on me, because what happened as I went into the TED world, I started meeting people who were actually changing our world. They were changing our future. They were doing the work. They were, scientists and academics who were spending their entire lives working on problems that were unlocking things for all of us. In fact, in those early days, I was working with scientists working on artificial intelligence. I mean, today we take that for
Wow.
granted, but 10 years ago, no one was talking about those things, right? And then the thing was, I look at these incredible individuals, and with their academic backgrounds, with their training, with their knowledge, and none of us knew who they were. If you think about TED events, this is part of it, right? They would bring people who none of us knew, except we should know them. I mean, they are not, they're not some actor or actress who's really entertaining us, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not changing our world. And we
Right.
put more stock in them than we do in these incredible individuals. And so I started to understand that while at the time I wouldn't have called myself a thought leader, I wouldn't have even said that I had anything that I could contribute. But what I could contribute and what I learned was I had a skill to help them, because what I could help them do was to unlock what it is they're doing in the world and help them get that out into the world. And that would help all of us. And so, they were so busy doing the work, they weren't telling anyone about it. And I could help them tell others about it. I had a marketing background. That was what I did for a living. And so that was how it all began. But then I learned I had this other skill, which was because I was a planner and a strategist in the agency world. My job was to take really, really large and complex swatches of information and synthesize it down into very simple insights. And I'd been doing that for years. And, in the advertising world, that would be the basis for the ad campaigns that we would put out into the world. So first you would have an insight. That insight would be used by our creatives, who would then turn it into, TV commercials or, online or whatever. But that skill was exactly what was needed, working with these incredibly complex thinkers and helping them literally take their life's work and turn it into one sentence, and then turn it
Mm.
into an 18-minute TED Talk. And so I found I had this skill I didn't know I had, and it was really valuable, especially to help these individuals become better known. And so that turned my whole career around. I left advertising. I knew that my time in advertising was coming to an end, but when I figured it out that this was something that I could actually create a career on, I left and I opened my company, Talk Boutique, and I opened it to help, experts transform into thought leaders using story so that they can create the impact that they want and they want to make, but actually more importantly, we need them to make.
So, what is the gap with these people that should be known, right? These people that are doing wonderful things out there impacting our world, and we don't know them. What is that gap in between knowing them and not knowing
Yeah. There's a couple of things.
them?
One, the work they do is highly complex, and it takes a lot of time. And so, they don't speak the same language as us. They speak the language of their work. And so we don't understand them. And then the second thing is they've got their head down. they don't even realize that anyone else needs to know. It's, it's one of the things that I love about working with scientists and academics is that, the first thing they would always say to me, I'd start working with one, and usually the very first thing was, I'm not creative. I don't have a creative bone in my body, because it's been trained out of them, right? So the belief is, I'm not a storyteller, I'm not creative, I don't know how to do this. And then I would start talking to them, and this intense curiosity would bubble up, like intense, because that's why they do what they do. They're intensely curious. And the second thing is, they would tell me, oh, I play in a band on the weekend or something like that. And so you see this sort of creative piece, but that's the piece they would keep hidden. And so they would default to their technical language. They would default to the facts and just the facts. And they would see using any form of influence as being almost the antithesis of who they are. And so what I had to help them to learn, and I still do this, I do this all the time every time I'm working with somebody who comes from a very complex industry, especially scientists and academics, is helping them to see that using influence is not, they're not selling out, and they're not selling. What they're doing is they're helping us to connect with the passion they have for the work that they do. And when we connect with that passion, we listen more deeply. And when we listen more deeply and they're able to communicate in a way that we can understand, we now start not only to understand what they're doing, but to also then start spreading that information. So how do you go from no one knows who I am and what I do to I'm a well-known thought leader? Is you need to learn how to tell stories about what it is you're doing and about why you do what you do, so that others actually want to tell others. Like it becomes that. And so they told two friends and they told two friends. And that is what TED is all about. It's ideas worth sharing. So you have to have the idea, which is not a story, by the way. An idea is very different from a story. So you have to have the idea, and then you have to have the story that holds it.
So that's an interesting statement, right? The idea is not a story. So when I think of that, my thought is, it's just the start. But what do you mean by that statement?
So what I mean is, so your idea, and when I'm working with a speaker or a thought leader, what we're doing is we're taking what they believe, what their passion is, and what they do, and we literally synthesize it down to one sentence. And that one sentence is comprised of a topic, a focus area or a point, and then a why, the impact. And what that is, and it often sounds like, if you think of it, and I never use this word with academics because it takes them somewhere else, but if you think of it as a thesis statement, it's really what it is, right? It's a one sentence thesis statement. And we comprise it. So, like I said, I have a framework that I use with speakers to do this. And we sort of chip away till we get it down to this very, very tight one sentence. Now that one sentence has to be unpacked, but the issue with that one sentence, which is an idea, and the idea is what it is that person is doing in the world, the topic, the category they're doing it within, and the impact that they hope to create. But because it's one sentence, it has to be unpacked. And often the best way to unpack it is by creating a story that holds it, that almost becomes the metaphor for it. So what we're doing is we're finding out what the idea is. So we've all listened to stories, and at the end of it, you think, what was the point of that? Right? Now, like nothing wrong with telling stories, but have a point, right? What is it you want me to understand? And that's your idea. And so when you're telling us what I call idea-centric stories, when you're doing that, you have to define your idea first, because the story really is almost a map to that idea. You think of it as the idea is the destination. That's where you're going. So, what route are you going to take? You're going to take the scenic route there. You're going to help us kind of see a lot of things. You're going to take the direct route there. How are you going to tell that story? In what detail? And what are the pieces along the way that you're going to kind of like the breadcrumbs you're going to leave for us that we may not even know you're leaving until you get to that point. And suddenly then you go, oh my God, I get it. I get it. Right. And we love those stories, right? We love it where a storyteller suddenly switches mid-story to something that actually feels unrelated until you hear it. And then you go, oh my God, I didn't even see that coming. And look what they did. And that's a good storyteller. And that's a good idea-centric storyteller, because what they've done is they knew where they were taking you. They were taking you on a journey and they got you there, and you were so engaged all the way along. You're going to take that same story and you're going to go and tell somebody else it because you were so amazed by how they did that. And when you do that, you're telling their idea as well. And so suddenly you're making them more well known. And we know we're doing this because we're like, oh my God, I went to this talk the other day. This speaker was incredible, told this story. Let me tell you the story. You tell the story. And then, that person is like, I got to hear that from that person, because we never do it justice, right? To the way that person did it. And you want that person, you want to hear it. You go look them up online and now you're learning about their work. You're learning about their impact. You're learning about their purpose. And you want to support them. And you also learn about why it's important that what they're doing in the world.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here a little
Sure.
bit. Do you have a short little story that you could show us what that looks like?
Yeah. You know what? Okay. Let me try this. So I'm giving a talk in a couple of weeks, actually less than a couple of weeks. And I'm working on a story right now for it. And it's all about, my own work. So, I do a lot of work around creating more diversity of thought leadership. And we are doing what's called a salon. So I run salons, and these are sort of, think of them as sort of, hearkening back to Bridgerton, like the days of these amazing salon type events where people would get together to talk about intelligent things, whatever, or arts and science and things like that. So it's like Bridgerton meets TED. It's kind of, that's what a salon is. And so I'm going to be doing a TED Talk, my own version of a TED Talk. And so I'm working on that story. And so I'm going to try it because I've been formulating it in my mind of like, how do I want to take this? So when we do a salon, we always ask a big question. And in this case, the question that we're asking is, have we become so immune to what's actually happening in the world? Have we numbed out from social media and too much overwhelm that we've forgotten we actually have agency and power? And are we willing to do the hard work to make the change that for the lives that we want? Right? So it's like, we're in this place of like, look, we can just keep numbing out and doing nothing. That's fine, except you're not going to have the life you want. Right? So this is the question we've put out there. So the story that I'll tell, and it's a bit of a sad story, but it's a story. It's my story of coming into the work that I do. And so it starts off with me arriving back home after being in. So when we're telling a story, and I'll actually kind of give you a little bit of the framework. So we start with the environment. Where is this taking place? So this was in 2014. It was a Saturday, beautiful day. I'd been gardening, and I had just gotten back. I had been to visit my family on the east coast of Canada. My brother had just gotten married to the love of his life, and they were blissfully happy. I had left on the Sunday before. This was a week later, Saturday, and I came in from gardening, and my phone rang, and it was my older sister. And she said, there's been an accident. And my brother and his wife, his new wife, had been involved in a motorcycle accident. And she had been airlifted to a hospital. He had been taken to a different hospital. I'm now back in Toronto. So this is, it's a 2.5-hour flight. It's 2,000 kilometers, or was that about 1,500 miles? So I'm hearing that, and it's serious. And so I literally drop everything, book a flight home, and get there the next day to the hospital where my sister-in-law is now in intensive care. She doesn't make it. The short story is she was pronounced brain dead. She lived for about 4 days, and we had to make the decision to take her off of life support. And I watched my brother go from the happiest day of his life to the most tragic day. And I can't say how impactful it was to walk into a funeral 2 weeks after a wedding and see literally my sister-in-law's wedding pictures for the first time as we're saying goodbye to her. And, that's a moment that you don't forget. And you look at your life differently. She was the same age as I am now, and, too young to die. And yet we never know how long we have. A year later, my father died. And it was with these 2 back-to-back deaths, I had to make some changes in my life. I realized that as I was at the time approaching 50 and needed to relook at what I was doing in my life, I had to ask myself, what was I going to leave behind in this world? What was I going to do? I was working in advertising. I was doing well. My daughter was doing well. She was in university. By all accounts, my life was great. There was nothing wrong with it. And yet, watching 2 people in my life die so quickly, one tragically, the other, my dad was diagnosed with cancer and was dead within 3 weeks. I didn't even get a chance to see him before he died. Because you don't know, you don't know how long you have. Even, when the doctors say it'll be months, it'll be, whatever, you just don't know. And I had to change my life. I knew it. And with my father's death, I made the decision to leave everything I knew behind. My career, my home, the comfort of who I was, and step into a world where I didn't know if I could be successful. But what I knew was that I needed to step into my own thought leadership, even though I didn't think I could be a thought leader. But I knew I had to try, because if there was one way that I could help the world, it was by helping other thought leaders step into theirs. And when we show up being that which we say is important, others follow. And in my case, I knew I needed to do this because the people that I was working with at the time through the work I was doing on TED, they were changing the future. And I couldn't help but look at the present we have and know that this was not the future that I wanted to be creating. And if there was any way that I could create a future that was better, and there was any way that I could contribute to that, then I was going to find a way to do it, even if it meant I was going to live in a shoebox doing it. I didn't know how I was going to make money. I didn't know what it was all going to look like, but I knew I had to try. And so I did. So that, and I'll just take you through what I did. I started off with the environment. The environment is a sense of place. That's where it took place. That was getting the call, right? My sister-in-law, my brother, my other sister, these were characters. My father, these were characters in it. I told you a little bit about them. Not a lot, but enough that you knew who they were. I brought you to a point, or like an idea, a point, which was I knew I needed to change my life. But then I sort of amped it up and saying, because I knew that I couldn't live in the way that I was. What I was doing was creating tension points in the story. And each time I created a tension point, I was giving you a breadcrumb that took you to the idea. And I leveraged that and moved into that idea of being stepping into my own thought leadership so I could help others step into theirs. And by doing that, I could help and contribute towards creating a future, and typically when I say this, I'll say creating a future that's more inclusive and more sustainable, so that everybody who lives within it is represented by the future that's created.
That was an interesting little framework, because not only did you do all those tactical points, but there was also just like any good movie or book, the emotions, flowed right along with it and just kept pulling you back into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that with us the first time.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I thank you for, for helping me with that too. Cause it's, like I said, I haven't said it out loud yet. That's the first time I've said that out loud. And there's many more things I'll probably add when I do it live, and it's a hard story to tell, as you can imagine.
Oh yeah, I definitely can imagine. So some people are very natural at storytelling. I have a friend of mine who, he was very wealthy, was a veteran, had an injury, opiates, became homeless, came back out of that, and now is running a couple of nonprofits helping veterans, women who are trafficked, all sorts of stuff. But he's absolutely phenomenal. And I saw the same mixture in what you laid down as what he does, right?
Mm.
But then there's some other people, right? There's those other people who get into the tactical, who, are totally engineer minded, as we talked about before, like I was. What are the biggest stumbling blocks for those type of people to get to this point? What are from your experience, the biggest hurdles that they have to overcome?
So to make sure I understand the question, what are the, when you say those people, just help me to understand who you're referring to.
The people who aren't natural good storytellers.
Who aren't or are?
Are not.
Are not. Okay, are not. Yes, got it. Okay. Look, I think storytelling, and I say this all the time, like, first of all, no one is trained in how to tell stories. Like we don't, unless you're a journalist or a writer. Of course, or a filmmaker, like if you're coming from those places, yes. But for the most part, like 98% of the population has never learned how to tell a story. I didn't learn how to tell a story until I started doing work with TEDx Toronto. I often say this, like, when I was in advertising, it's a storytelling medium. No one ever taught me how to tell a story. And, so I would, I'd have these presentations where sometimes, like you knock it out of the park and you're like, yes, that was incredible. And then the next day you'd have another presentation. It was just, yeah, it was okay. And why? What was the difference? And what I know now is it was story. In the ones that I knocked it out of the park, I had a story. In the ones that I didn't, that was a lot of facts and data. And so that one of the biggest stumbling blocks for people who are not storytellers is, first of all, A, they think that they're not a storyteller. B, they think that they have nothing interesting to say. They have no stories. And then the next thing is that people are naturally born storytellers. And that's not true. Some people are able to tell a story, but it doesn't make them a natural at it. You can always get better. And that's why having a framework really, really helps. So when I started working on TEDx Toronto and we started building stories and I started using different frameworks, it made a huge difference. And the one that I use the most when we're doing more corporate type work is something we call the story spine. And I've kind of evolved it. It's not my framework. It's one that's been around for many, many years. I've evolved it with creating the idea inside of it. So that's my own little add to it. But frameworks are helpful. So that's the first place I do. So that's number one, is start with a framework. The second thing for people who are not good storytellers is to understand that the key to telling a good story is to focus on being in the story, not being outside of the story. When we're in the story, when we're telling it as if we're living it, you're feeling. Use your emotions. Stories are emotional. And there's tons of brain science around storytelling because it actually lights up our brain. It has our brain firing with electrical activity. Why? Because what we're doing when we tell stories, we use emotional language. And so we're using things like sight, sound, taste, touch, texture. All these things come into story. And those are all different parts of our brain. And why is that important? Well, the more parts of our brain that light up, the more we remember, because memories are stored all over the brain. And memories and our brain is both, it's associative as well as predictive, right? So what's happening is our brain wants to, it's always trying to figure out what's going to happen next. So there's the predictive nature, right? So we get engaged with the story, and the associations are what help us to remember it and bring up the points. So for people who are not good storytellers, helping them to relax and go, give us detail. Don't try and rush through that story. Don't be like, oh, I'm just going to go right to here's what the other day this thing happened to me and then we were done. Like that's how most people tell a story, right? They go right to the point. But if you take the time, set it up. What's the environment? Where's it happening? Who are the characters? Why are you telling this story? Now, what's the thing that's happening that's making the reason you're telling the story even more important? I always like to call that the and then moment. It's like you reveal the thing that happened and then something even bigger happened. Why do you do that? You do that because you're bringing your audience in even more. And so and you might even have many and then moments, right? Like we all love those stories where it's like another twist. Oh, and another twist. It keeps us interested. So don't be afraid to do that. We all have the ability to do it. We just don't know how. And so that's where frameworks come in and practice, but also have a point. Know where you're going. Know what's coming at the end of your story. Because that's the other thing, is that we think the thing that's happening is the reason for it. But stories are really the ability for us to impart complex information. So when we use our story in that way, it helps us as well. We feel good about our stories because, like, oh, I finally got that person to understand that thing that I've been trying to get them to understand for years, and our story does that.
So you mentioned that you help corporations as well as, TED and all of that other stuff. So I'm interested in the corporation, how storytelling really works in that environment, right? I mean, we're talking EBITDA and, all these,
it's all stories,
strategic, all this stuff.
Yeah.
How does that look?
It's all stories. Like this is the key, right? So it's when you are like, I have several programs that are around storytelling for leaders. And we run a corporate program called that, where we work with the senior leadership team, think the C-suite, and we train them in how to do their corporate presentations like TED Talks. And it literally culminates with a stage presentation where these senior leaders are speaking to often their entire organization, doing their presentation in 10 minutes. And it's it's tough. Let me tell you, it's like there's a lot of sweating going on at the, as they're getting on stage, because, suddenly like they've got no deck, or if they've got a deck, it's very short, and, and they have to tell stories. So what it looks like, what we do with them is we help them to understand that your life is the story that helps your business. So use your life. Don't be afraid of that. So yeah, you're going to be talking about EBITDA. Sure. Okay, great. Maybe like let's just say that this year we had a bad year and we've fallen behind on revenue, and we're going to have to make some really tough decisions. Maybe that's the story that has to come out, right? Well, when was a time in your life where you had to make a tough decision, where you didn't want to make that decision, but you knew you had to, right? Now, when you start off that presentation telling that story, when I was 21, I had to make the decision to do whatever, leave my parents' home, or maybe I had to make the decision to end a relationship that I thought was going to be the love of my life. And in reality, we wanted different things. We loved each other deeply, but we could not make it work. So we had to make a hard decision. And today I can look back at that decision and go, and recognize that it was the best thing for both of us. We were both in a better place. But it didn't make that moment any easier. And in fact, when we got right down to it, we had to actually separate our lives. And so there were some hard moments. And this is what we're going to have to do this year. We're going to have to go inside of this business. We're going to have to make some hard decisions. Not everyone is going to be moving forward with us. And that's just a reality. And it's not because we don't like you. And it's not because, you've done anything wrong. It's because the reality of the business now requires it. And so that's a way, and that you can see how, do you really want to tell your story of breaking up with the love of your life at 21? Maybe not. But if it can help the team understand who you are, because what that does, right, is it shows compassion. You tell us the story about you, as and we, maybe you're the CEO, and maybe, we've always seen you as this, maybe even a tyrant, maybe somebody that we don't really like. And we have this little backstory. You're no longer that person we thought you were, the stories that we made up about you. Now we have the real story that you're telling us, and it's vulnerable, and it's emotional, and it's hard to share, and it's real. And now we trust you because you told us something about yourself that we would never have known. And because you did, even if we're one of the people that's going to be let go, we're not going to look at you and go, you don't know what you're doing. We're going to look at you with a little bit more compassion.
That's an interesting take on that, right? I don't know if there's ever been a time in the C-suite, maybe one or two people that I've talked to that actually have that sort of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And just listening to what you just said, it makes me really intrigued about how much those companies prosper after they do something like that. Can you speak a little bit to that? And I mean, has it been really effective as far as their business and profits?
Yeah, when we work with leadership teams, it is really transformational for them. Again, because we'll work with people in all aspects. A lot of times, they're not doing the type of story that I just gave in terms of like, hey, we're going to have to lay people off, because typically if they've hired us, they're not in a bad situation, right? Because they're investing in training, and we know training is one of the first things that goes out the window when times are tight. But so we're not really often telling that particular story. But what happens is it changes the way they see themselves, and because of that, it changes their business. And they will come back like, we've worked with so many different corporate leaders over the years, and meeting up with them later, they'll say, that was a turning point for me, because I learned, and the two things that they come up with: one, they learned to be vulnerable. And that really makes a difference. And then the second thing is they learn this skill of how to actually create their idea. Like those two things together, vulnerability and having a clear idea, it shifts everything. It shifts how they see themselves. It shifts how they see their business. It shifts the way that they come to work. And it shifts the way that the people who work with them and for them show up. And so, of course, it changes the business. But every business is different, right? And it's interesting to watch. We've had some businesses that have like changed direction in terms of what's important. We've had other businesses who have suddenly seen, like, sometimes we'll work with, like, I remember one we worked with a large bank, and but we worked with their technical team. And at the time they were doing some very, very deep technical work in the area of data analytics. And of course, like, if you know any sort of technical people, again, most of us don't understand what a word they're saying, right? They're talking and, all kinds of, algorithms and things like that. And we taught them how to communicate because the organization needed to know what they were doing, because they were literally, reorganizing the data of the organization, and the organization needed to be able to access that. And there needed to be a two-way conversation going on. And by giving them the skill of being able to be storytellers, it allowed them to start talking to each other in a way more effective way. And that project, which had many delays, suddenly got fast tracked because people started to communicate better.
Nice. I can definitely see where that'd be more effective. And you bring up data analytics, and I actually, for a very, very short time period in my career, I did some data analytics, and I actually had a very good mentor who said that data is all about storytelling. It's not
Absolutely.
about the data.
That's
You
right.
can make it say whatever you want it to say. You
Yep.
just got to present it in the right manner and tell the story behind it to get the results that you're looking for.
That's it. That is 100%. I actually owned a data company for a while, and that was a big part of it was like, what story are we telling with this data? What story is the data telling us, first of all? Because you got to go looking for it. Data is just a whole lot of disparate information, but you got to have a through line that you're looking for, first of all, to go find the pieces you need, and then you got to stitch it together in a way that others can see what you're seeing in the data. And so finding those stories and being able to tell them. I mean, we do this all the time right now. And a lot of us do this intuitively, not even really understanding it from a business perspective, when we are doing targeting an audience, right? So what are the data points that we look for to go, who is responding to the campaigns, to the offers that we've got out there in the marketplace? What do they look like? We go looking for a story in the data. Where do they live? What do they buy? How much do they make? How much do they spend? Like, we can find that all of this is in the data, because we can do all kinds of, data overlays to go, that person who just bought whatever, well, they lived at whatever, zip code. And now we can find out a little bit about that zip code. And now we can find out what neighborhood they're in. What kind of, what are the housing prices in that neighborhood? All kinds of things we can do. All we're doing is looking for a story in the data. And that story is telling us who our buyers are.
Yeah, I never thought about it like that, but it's almost like reverse engineering the story, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we used to call it, that was cluster analysis, right? We do all this cluster analysis, find these naturally occurring clusters, and then within those clusters, you'd start to understand more and more about it.
So when people are learning this skill of storytelling, what are some things that you should absolutely stay away from?
That's a good question. I have never been asked that question. Wow. What should you stay away from? Well, you know what? I don't think there's so the first thing that came to mind was, don't go deep on the data and facts, but actually that's not true. Like, I don't think there's anything you should stay away from. What I would say is be focused. Okay. And focused I know it might sound a little bit of opposite to what I was saying earlier. But when you're telling a story, have the destination in mind and stay with that destination. But you might actually need to put some data and facts in there, and that's okay. But you've got to contextualize them, right? So you're not just going to start off by, 80% of, participants did this thing, right? Because you've lost me. You've lost me right away because, like, why do I even need to know this? But if you've just told me that, we're seeing, our wetlands being, eroded, and the red-winged blackbirds are, losing their habitat, and that's important because these birds give us, they eat mosquitoes. And I'm making this up as I go, by the way. I know none of this, whether it's true. I just so happen to have a lot of red-winged blackbirds in my backyard. And so
They generally live in ditches.
yeah. Yeah. So, but so, like, if we were to contextualize that and say, and when we remove the wetlands, we see, 80% of these birds die off, which means the mosquito population goes out of control. Now I'm like, well, damn, I know I don't want mosquitoes, because I'm sure that they have some redeeming qualities, but in my world, I really could live without them.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So, and this is it. It's like, what is it, where are you going? Contextualize your data if you're going to have data. And that's what a good story is. Stories are context, right? They're context for your idea. And context is the thing that we forget that is necessary for understanding. Because, even though you and I are speaking the same language right now, the reality is our experiences are so different from each other. And so if I'm not contextualizing what I'm saying to you, what I'm doing is I'm leaving it up for you to interpret it. And that's a risk. Now, when we're just having a conversation, you can say to me, oh, what do you mean by that? But
Right.
when you are giving a presentation or doing some form of one-way communication or writing something, you no longer have that. And if you haven't given context, now you're leaving it up to the listener or the reader to interpret what you mean. And there's a pretty good chance they're going to interpret it in a way that's different from what you want them to interpret it. So give them the context that gives them the interpretation. And that's what story is. That is 100% what story is.
So when you were telling your story,
Mm-hmm.
you brought us through a range of emotions, right? The high of meeting the love of his life to the accident. Are there any emotions that basically sell the story better than others?
The emotions that you feel as the storyteller, you have to feel them. When I feel something, you feel it. And that's the key, right? If you're telling a story and you've told it so many times that it is not, there's no more emotion. Like I could, if I had told that story and it no longer affected me, you wouldn't have believed me.
Right.
Right. So we always have to be careful with emotions. The other piece to it is when we are going through that range of emotions, you as the storyteller need to be in a place where you can manage through those emotions. You still need to feel them, and they can't be so raw that it takes you down. The audience worries for you, right? So they're like, they don't want to see you taken down by those emotions. And so if it is something that's highly personal and highly painful, you might want to stay away from it, or tell it in a way that you're, it's like, there's a saying, which one of my speakers said to me, and it has stayed with me, which is, we have to teach from our scars, not our wounds. And I think it's such a powerful storytelling technique, right? Find the places that have scarred over. It's okay to tell from there. Don't go into the wounds, because you not only do you injure your audience, you injure yourself. So it's
I'm
a
writing that one
really,
down.
really powerful one. Yeah.
I like that. So just kind of wrap all this up. This has been an amazing journey on storytelling as a whole. A lot of great insights, and it's amazing how much we covered in such a short amount of time. So I appreciate you giving this audience all of those insights. But I do want to touch on, you are going to be wrapping all this up in a book, I hear.
Yes, yes.
So can you give us a little snippet on what that's going to be like, when it's coming out,
Yeah.
that sort of thing?
Yes, I'm about 80% of the way through it. So it's called, right now, the working title is The Everyday Thought Leader. And, for me, one of the things that I think has become really, really clear is that thought leadership is one of those things that we put out there as other people doing. And I think that when we stop doing that, and when we look at ourselves, and we can start to see that we all have the ability to be thought leaders. Maybe you're a thought leader in your family, or maybe you're a thought leader in your community, or maybe you're a thought leader in your, in your company, or in your industry, or maybe in your country. Like, it doesn't, I think when we think about this term thought leadership, we tend to look out at the, leaders of industry and leaders of countries. And it doesn't have to be that. When we contribute our voice, when each of us chooses to speak up from our place of uniqueness and diversity, whatever that is, diversity isn't just, hey, I look a little different from you. It can be everything from, like, I found out 2 years ago I was neurodiverse. I had no idea. And what does that mean? Neurodiversity is, under the areas of autistic, attention deficit, synesthesia, high sensitivity. Like, these are a whole class of what's called neurodiversity. Well, that we need more of that. When we
Mm-hmm.
each speak out from our place of diversity, what we're doing is we're adding a level of understanding to the world. I said earlier, it's about context. We all have unique context. When I tell you my context, you hear what I'm saying to you in a different way. It makes an impact on you. And if what I'm saying is in some way teaching you something, now you're going to say it in the way, in your area of expertise, differently. And you're going to add another layer. And what we do is we inspire each other, not only to speak up, but now what we're doing is we're adding more structure and more foundation to the future we're creating, because it's more inclusive. We're all speaking. It's not just a couple of voices. And I think so many of us forget that if we don't add our voice, we're actually robbing the world of that understanding.
Mm.
So my book is about that. It's about the everyday thought leader stepping into who they are, why they want the things they want, and showing us a new way to see what it is they see, so that we can see our world differently. And so, it's, like I said, I'm about 80% of the way there. I keep trying to find the time. Oh my God, that's the hardest thing in the world. So my intention is to get it out by the end of this year. And I will do that. Watch for it. In the meanwhile, though, I continue every day. I actually go live on LinkedIn. I do a little thought of the day. This is my way of adding my voice out there in the world.
Awesome. So LinkedIn, your channel, or excuse me, YouTube, your channel is. I've watched quite a few of
Yeah.
those.
Yeah. So my YouTube channel is the Thought Leader Academy. And please, come and see me on there. Like I said, I'm live there. So I'm live on LinkedIn and YouTube every day, usually somewhere around noon. I kind of, whenever I've got the 5 minutes to jump on and do it, I do. So I'm usually there. And then I do, again, on every second Friday, I do on YouTube a show called Conversations with Thought Leaders, where I speak to all kinds of interesting people just in the things that they're doing in the world.
Yeah, I just started catching those. They're pretty darn good.
Oh,
And you
thank
do
you.
a replica of those on LinkedIn, or is your LinkedIn?
It's the same. We just stream it across both channels. Just because I have a very, very large following on LinkedIn. But I'd really like everyone to come over to YouTube because it's actually a more intimate channel to be able to communicate with people. LinkedIn, because it's a social media platform, it is what it is, right? They all have their own
Right.
idiosyncrasies. No shade on any of them, but the Thought Leader Academy is where, and again, because this is where I'm going to be probably doing a lot of stuff on my book as well.
Fantastic. And your websites, in case anybody needs any of that nice corporate leadership, thought leader training.
Yeah, so that's my talkboutique.com. You can absolutely sign up for our newsletter. Also, too, like the Story Spine, actually, if you go to my YouTube channel, you can download free copies of the Story Spine and you can use the framework. We've got a couple of frameworks there that are easy for you to download and use. And I encourage you to do that because honestly, they were game changers for me. And that's why I've made them available for free. It's like, just look, I would love to work with you, but more importantly, I would love for you to get your voice out there in the world, whatever way makes sense for you.
And that right there is servant leadership at its finest. So definitely appreciate you coming on, Andrea. This has been excellent for me. I am absolutely enthralled by storytelling as a whole. Once again, coming from an engineering background, it's been a little difficult for me, but
I've worked with
I've been learning a little bit more every day.
I work with a lot of engineers and I get that. So story is, there is a process. And that's the thing. I think, it's always finding that. So Steve, this has been phenomenal. Thank you. You are an incredible host and a thought leader as well. And so I really appreciate the work that you're putting out there in the world and the way in which you're helping others see themselves. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that, Andrea.
Yeah.
Hope you guys all enjoyed this episode of the Fireforge Leader Podcast. Once again, thank you, Andrea, and we'll see you behind the scenes.
All right.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.